Welcome to the couch. I'm Katelyn, a therapist who loves anime, and this is where we talk about stories that matter to us, stories that connect us. So, if you're new here, today's video is a little bit different. This one is going to be more like an extended couch chat. So, it's slower, it's a little bit more reflective. So, for some context for what we are talking about today, this idea came about because I was watching this anime called A Monster Wants to Eat Me with my brother. So after we finished the season, it it just stayed with me. We kept talking about it, about what the characters were feeling, um, what the story was showing us, and I realized that I couldn't quite just let it go. I felt like the more that I sat with it, the more I felt like it deserved its own conversation. To talk about what it portrays really accurately about depression, where I struggled with it as a therapist, and why that distinction matters. So, this isn't going to be about tearing the show down, it's about asking a question the story itself doesn't really ask, and that is to what benefit? Meaning, what does this portrayal actually give us as viewers? Okay, so before we get into today's discussion, I want to do a quick content note. So, this video, we are going to be talking about depression and suicidal ideation. I am not diagnosing characters. Instead, we are exploring how stories depict these experiences and the lessons they leave for the audience. There's a difference between showing something realistically and portraying it responsibly. Realism is valuable, but it isn't automatically instructive or protective for us as viewers. And that's an important distinction. That's something I will return to throughout our discussion. I also want to note that there will be themes of hopelessness and passive suicidal ideation, which can be triggering. So, if at any point you need to pause or step away, that is completely okay. Let's start with what the show does well. Minako's emotional state is portrayed in a quiet, resigned way. It's flat, almost muted.
ひなこひなこひなこ
There's no over dramatization, no sudden outburst to signal, look at me, I am depressed. This is important because passive suicidal ideation often looks like this in real life: quiet, almost invisible. It's not always a dramatic plea for help, it's subtle, inward resignation. It's a sense that nothing really matters, or the world could keep going without you and you'd be fine. By showing this nuance, the show gives viewers a window into the internal experience of depression. That alone can feel validating for people who have experienced it themselves. Here's another layer. Hinako's calm acceptance of the promise illustrates a critical point.
私を死なせてくれるかもしれない。
It's about a sense of hopelessness, of giving up on change, um, of believing there is no alternative. For some people, seeing this reflected on screen can provide recognition, a feeling that, okay, Someone else gets how it feels to exist in that quiet hopelessness. Now, notice this. This is where I began to struggle as a therapist.
だったら約束ちゃんとし直しましょう。本当にいつか食べてくれるの？え、
The monster is often read as a metaphor for internalized despair. But here's the problem: it's never questioned, it's treated as inevitable. The promise itself is framed as a necessary next step. Story shows how no exploration of alternatives, no human intervention, no conversation, right, that could disrupt this cycle. Accurately portraying depression without modeling any form of response can unintentionally normalize hopelessness, especially for viewers who already struggle with rumination. Letting despair go unchallenged can quietly reinforce the belief that nothing will help, that this is just how things are. That doesn't mean every story needs a solution, but it does matter whether a story invites reflection or leaves suffering sealed off and unquestioned. There are anime stories that sit with depression in a way that feels deeply honest without leaving viewers stranded inside of it. And I want to talk about a few of those here, not to say that they're better and not to turn this into a ranking of stories, but to help clarify what felt missing in A Monster Wants to Eat Me, because that distinction really matters. When I think about stories that portray depression responsibly, A Silent Voice is one that I keep coming back to. This film doesn't soften suicidal ideation, it doesn't rush healing, and it doesn't pretend that connection is easy or comfortable. But what it does do is refuse to let suffering stay isolated. What one character is going through doesn't just live inside their head, it spills into relationships. Silence hurts people, avoidance costs something, and the story allows us to sit with that discomfort. What I appreciate is that this film doesn't expect anyone to suddenly know the right thing to do. People misunderstand each other, they mess up, they retreat, they try again. The narrative keeps returning to the same quiet question: what happens when someone turns toward connection instead of disappearing into shame? And the answer isn't everything gets fixed, it's just that something shifts. The trajectory changes, even slightly. As a viewer, and especially as a therapist, that matters because this story isn't just showing us what depression feels like, it's showing us what happens around it. It acknowledges how hard it is to reach out and also how heavy it can be to carry pain alone. That doesn't make this film hopeful in a shallow way. It makes it honest in a way that still leaves room for movement. Fruits Basket explore something similar, but over a much longer stretch of time. In this story, depression often looks very subtle. It looks like being polite, like being agreeable, like smiling and saying, I'm fine, while quietly pulling back. And the show takes that kind of pain seriously. When somebody withdraws, people around them notice, even if they don't fully understand what's happening. They worry, they misinterpret it, sometimes they push too hard, sometimes they don't push enough. But the story never treats withdrawal as invisible or harmless. It keeps asking a gentle, persistent question. What does it mean to stay present when disappearing feels safer? And healing there isn't dramatic. There aren't speeches or sudden breakthroughs. It's built out of small moments, being asked again, being noticed, being imperfectly seen. That doesn't cure depression, but it changes how alone someone has to be inside of it. Even in a series like Demon Slayer, which exists in a very different genre, suffering is rarely treated as something passive. Characters experience devastating loss. They break, they grieve, and the story doesn't minimize that, but it constantly brings us back to choice. Not a perfect choice, not a hopeful choice every time, just a direction. Who am I going to be in response to this? What values am I willing to hold on to, even when everything hurts? Pain doesn't disappear, but it pushes characters somewhere, and that movement gives the suffering context. What these stories share isn't optimism, it's engagement. They don't just show pain, they stay curious about it. They ask how it affects people, how it shapes relationships, how it influences choices. And they allow space for response, even when that response isn't perfect, right? When I contrast that with A Monster Wants to Eat Me, what stands out for me isn't the darkness. It's that the pain is shown clearly, but it's rarely responded to. No one names it, no one turns towards it. And the story itself doesn't seem interested in what might happen if somebody did. The narrative feels more focused on depicting rumination than on engaging with it. And that's where my question keeps coming back. To what benefit? Portraying suicidal ideation accurately can be deeply validating, and that matters. But when a story stops there, when it doesn't offer reflection, response, or even a question, it risks reinforcing the idea that despair is static, that nothing interrupts it, that nothing changes. And as a therapist, that's the line that I keep noticing. Not between dark stories and hopeful ones, but between stories that show pain and stories that engage with it. This anime may resonate deeply, and that's valid, but realism without responsibility feels incomplete. Stories don't just reflect pain, they teach us how to understand it and what to do with it. Okay, everyone. So that's my take on A Monster Wants to Eat Me. I'd love to hear how the story landed for you. If you've struggled with suicidal thoughts, even small acts of connection matter. If you enjoy therapist reflections on anime, feel free to join me here on the couch and subscribe. Let's keep these conversations going. And until next time, rest easy, feel deeply, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye.